Olá, sou a Mariana Alvim, bem-vindos ao Vale a Pena, o meu podcast onde conhecemos as pessoas enquanto leitores, com o apoio da WUC, a maior livraria online portuguesa. Fiquem por aí, vale a pena!
Tess Gunty was born and raised in South Bend, Indiana, and now lives in Los Angeles. She graduated from the University of Notre Dame with a Bachelor of Arts in English and from New York University, NYU, with a Master's in Fine Arts and MFA degree in Creative Writing. The Rabbit Hutch is in Portugal, just arrived. O Contrário de Nada, it's her debut novel and won the 2022 National Book Award for Fiction and several other awards. The Waterstones Debut Fiction Prize, it was finalist for the John Leonard Prize. You had lots of awards, so hello and congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. In addition to being an American bestseller, the novel is also a bestseller in Germany and the UK, so maybe soon we can add Portugal.
Yes, let's hope. Let's hope.
So it's about the daily lives of the residents in a depressed Midwestern complex. You want to tell a little bit about your book?
Sure. So it takes place in a fictional post-industrial town called VALE. Exactly. Yeah. And it's inspired by my hometown, but many other towns in this region of the U.S. So this region of the U.S. is often referred to as the Rust Belt. It stretches across several Midwestern states. And a lot of these places were sort of conjured into existence by industries. These towns developed around an industry, often related to automobile production. And then in the 60s, most of them closed quite abruptly. And so a lot of towns were kind of economically orphaned. And this is a region that's home to millions of Americans, but it's pretty underrepresented in the American imagination and certainly beyond America. So I wanted to write about my home region and to sort of offer a sort of like a folkloric, mythical place that was modeled on my hometown.
Okay, so you did a lot of research because it seems like a real story.
Well, yes, in some ways, the research for this book was unlike any other research I've done because certainly there were exceptions to this, but all the research I did related to my town and related to this region of America. It confirmed things that I felt to be true about this place when I was growing up, but I never had any reference points. I'd never lived anywhere else. So, for example, it felt kind of, I think the economic pain was really palpable everywhere you looked. It was clear in the landscapes, it was clear in the people, and yet you were sort of told this is an average place to live, kind of a normal place to live. And then when I was doing research, I knew that when I was in high school, my town was, I think, number 2 on this list of top 10 dying American cities.
Aww. And
I found it to be actually kind of a comforting confirmation of what I felt to be true about the place. Like, this isn't just a normal place to live. And then when I was doing research, it was a similar experience where, I discovered that, for example, Indiana has the most polluted natural waterways of any state. The rates of violent crime in my hometown were much, much higher than Indiana's average, and Indiana's average was higher than the U.S.'s average. So these experiences that I was almost gaslighting myself about when I was growing up, telling myself, no, this is just a normal average place and you're being too sensitive or overreacting.
It was the reality.
It was the reality, yeah. It was the reality.
So do you still have friends there? What did they say about the book? Because It was visual. I saw the town. I saw Vaca Valley.
Yeah.
Reading your book.
I do still have friends there, and my parents still live there, and so I go back a lot. And my fiance, he's also from there, and we visit his family. And so I was really nervous about how people from my hometown would react. And I do always emphasize that this isn't my town. And for example, in my hometown, there's a university, the University of Notre Dame, where I attended. And that's now the primary employer of the town. It's an enormous source of town pride and town identity, and I think because that university was there when Studebaker Automobiles, which is the car company that I modeled, the fictional car company in my book after, when that closed, there was some other source of employment to absorb some of the economic shock. Of course, not everyone can transition to a job at a private university from a factory, but this book was kind of a thought experiment to ask what would have happened to this town if there hadn't been any other force to kind of absorb the fall. And there are plenty of towns that I did model it on in that region that didn't have another source of income or prosperity. So I have been really grateful because the people in my hometown, everyone I know, has been extraordinarily supportive and encouraging. And I did an event at my hometown library after I won the National Book Award. And
Wow.
it was, I think it had already been planned, and then it just so happened to correspond with the award. But it was really special because this was a library I went to as a child every week. My parents always took me there, and the room was packed. It was standing room only. It was people from all parts of my life, and everyone was so supportive. And of course, I'm sure there are people who hate the novel, and I don't hear from them, fortunately.
Fortunately, exactly. You don't need to.
Yeah.
So this is also a wake-up call for those who don't know this reality, for people that live other places that don't have this problem, these factories shutting down and economy.
Yeah. I found, now that I've had the opportunity to meet readers around the world, really, I found that there are equivalents of this kind of town really all over the industrialized world. And another thing that was interesting is I was always aware that in my own hometown, there were plenty of people I knew who had no idea that this was the reality for about half the city. The design of the city is such that you can kind of live in very isolated worlds, and because it's car dependent, nobody really collides unless they have to. So, I was living in neighborhoods where most people were suffering from pretty extreme intergenerational poverty and neglect. And then I was attending Catholic schools. My mom worked at a Catholic high school, and so we received free tuition. And we were able to attend a school that we might not have afforded otherwise. So most of my classmates in those schools were living in the suburbs in a really different part of town. And they were living in gated communities, and they didn't have any exposure really to this side of the city.
This reality, they didn't see it.
Right. So I'm aware that you can spend your whole life really in a place like that and never really know that half the population is living very differently.
And another, not half, but most of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Exactly. Right. So why did it take you 5 years to write this novel? You had to stop it? Was it research? What happened?
It was mostly, honestly, it was mostly a matter of, I think it was a matter of maintaining confidence throughout a series of rejections on others. So I was working on a lot of other manuscripts as well, and this was, I had finished a short story collection, linked short stories. I had finished 2 novellas. I'd written half of another novel. And with all of these projects, I was trying to find an agent. In America, you have to find an agent first, and then the agent will help you find a publisher. And I was also submitting stories to small publications and contests and all of that. And I just wasn't getting any traction. Often I would receive encouraging rejections, but they were rejections. And so I was accumulating so many rejections over the course of this time. I wasn't a writer who just had the one project. I was always working on a lot, and I've been writing ever since I was little. So I felt comfortable putting projects in drawers and moving on to the next one. I felt I had kind of made peace with the idea that not everything I wrote was, had a home in the market, and that wasn't the only value in writing. But it took a toll on my confidence, and also throughout that time I had to support myself with a lot of odd jobs. I was doing a ton of nannying, and I was researching for a professor for his book. I was doing a lot of freelance writing and fact-checking and things like that. So it just was hard to find the energy, the time, the confidence to continue working on this book amid all of the other pressures. I didn't have health insurance for a long time. I was making so little money. It was a pretty stressful way to live. I certainly wouldn't recommend that anyone put all of their hopes, professional hopes, in literary fiction, because it's a very precarious world. So maybe if I had, if I'd been a professional writer, if I'd had the kind of financial support at the time to simply write, I might have finished this earlier. But I am grateful it took me that long, because I started it when I was 23. And over the course of that time, I think of course, like everyone, I matured and changed. And so the book was able to kind of mature and change alongside me. And I think if I had rushed it out into the world in my very early 20s, I wouldn't have been as at peace with the results. Yeah.
Great, that's great. But It's definitely a book written by a woman, not a girl. Definitely.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, it is. It's very mature. I was impressed, but you've heard this before. I was impressed by your age when you're very young, which is great. So you just started, and all those projects you were writing. I hope to read them soon. The short stories, the novellas.
Yeah, we'll see what. Yeah, maybe one day. I'll revisit them.
So the Rabbit Hutch, I thought that Blendine stays with us. The story stays with us after the last page. And you know what got me? Something that got me, and I'm not going to spoil, but for those who read, or even those who haven't read yet, maybe they'll remember this when it happens. It was when Moses' mother asked him for 5 things. The last one. The last one she asked him, I was like, oh, I had to stop reading. It was like, my hand touched my heart.
Yeah. Oh, that's
it was
really
very
good
deep.
To know.
It said a lot about everything.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah. I found those sections were some of the hardest to write. I mean, Moses and his mother's relationship, that was a challenging aspect of the book. So thanks for saying that.
It is. It was very special. Her last requests. Yeah, great. Yeah. So it took you 5 years. You were writing a lot of things. You had the odd jobs. Sure, we have to pay bills.
Yeah.
So when you said already you had your library next to near your home, and you started writing early in your life. So when did you discover the pleasure for reading?
Oh, I don't even remember because I think it was so early on. My parents were really supportive of reading and all kind of creative things. My mom is an art teacher. My dad is a sociologist, and he loves learning and reading. And so he would read to us every night, and he would always do the voices. He was a really good performer. He would do the accents, and it just was always something I looked forward to. And I don't remember a time without it. I think my parents said that I was so obsessed with this one story, this picture book that I read that someone read to me, because I didn't know how to read yet when I was 4, that I memorized the whole thing and would constantly recite it. And so there's something about fiction that just immediately took root in my imagination and kind of wouldn't let go. And around that time too, I just started telling stories and writing stories. So it was a very symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, and that ability to read so early, that is what helped you also to realize that where you were living, it wasn't great. What you said about your town, your true Valley. You said when you realize that this is not the best that can be because you read, you had the world.
That's true. I think being exposed to other worlds, other cities, and real or imagined, it helps position you and kind of anchor you in. It helps you see your own reality better. Yeah, most of us, if you don't have access to travel or ability to kind of experience other worlds when you're growing up, for me, it was the only way I really experienced it, because we didn't really have a television. We had a television, we didn't really get any shows, so we didn't have that much exposure to any other way of living except through books. I had this extraordinary portal into other worlds.
A portal into other worlds. I love that sentence. Exactly. That's what it is. It's your way of traveling in your imagination, and not only. So when are you able to read, Tess?
Oh, right now I confess that I haven't had the brain space to concentrate intensely on a book in a while, just because I'm in the midst of moving. I was living in LA, and I'm now moving. I moved to New York about a week ago, and that's a cross-country move. There was a lot to coordinate, and also, traveling for the book, and I'm about to start teaching. So there's a lot going on. But I do find that even in those very busy times, I can listen to audiobooks, and I find that those, I often listen to very plot-driven audiobooks that I wouldn't normally read. For some reason, if I'm really busy, well, it's not that mysterious. When you're really busy, something that's a thriller, a kind of gripping plot can still captivate you even if you're distracted. So right now I've been listening to a Norwegian thriller called The Snowman by Joe Nesbo. But I do get to read on planes, and that's nice, yeah. There's a lot of travel in my life these days.
Yeah, you get, of course, hotels and planes.
Yes.
What's it called, the name the Norwegian book you're reading? You're listening to?
Yeah, that I'm listening to. It's in English, the title is The Snowman.
The Snowman.
It was written in Norwegian. I don't know if it's the same title.
And you're enjoying it?
I love the audiobook. it's kind of hard to know, like, if I read it, would I love it as much as I love listening to it? I think the reader is really good, and he has a very soothing voice, but it's a very creepy novel, so it's about a serial killer. It's something I would never normally read, but it kept coming up on lists of best thrillers, and I realized that this was like a genre I never really experienced, and I thought I'll give it a try, and it's really captivating. It's a very complex story, so I actually find myself rewinding a lot and what happened? But yeah, it's well written too, which is not always the case with work that's very plot driven. Sometimes you have to sacrifice language when you read one of those, but this is also I think the prose is good.
The Snowman, I'll write it down in the episode description. So to cleanse the palate, you read thrillers.
Yes, it's true. I think, it's funny, like I find myself, it was almost like the more I did publicity for this novel and talked about my reading life, the more important it became to reacquaint myself with the very fundamental, basic pleasures of reading. Like, it's true that most of what I read and respond to now is more literary or poetry, kind of more experimental. And I find that if I don't once in a while reacquaint myself with these very basic pleasures of reading, the page turning, the world transporting, the character building, these things that I fell in love with as a child, it's my own writing starts to suffer. So it's important to have a balanced diet, I think.
Great analogy.
Yeah.
So the books you chose for this conversation as a reader. Enter Ghost from Isabella Hammad. It's her second novel.
Yes. Yeah, so Enter Ghost, it takes its title from a stage direction in Hamlet. It's the moment when Hamlet's father appears on stage after dying. And this is a novel about a production of Hamlet. It follows, the narrator's named Sonia. She's 38. She's been living in London. She's a theater actress, and her family is Palestinian, but she hasn't visited anyone in that region for a long time. She hasn't been back in many years. And her sister's living in Haifa, so following a kind of bitter end of a love affair, Sonia goes to visit her sister in Haifa. And during this time, Sonia's sister's friend persuades Sonia to participate in an Arabic production of Hamlet, which they're going to stage in the West Bank. And it becomes as the book goes on, it becomes clear that this is a very, I suppose, politically explicit interpretation of Hamlet. They're drawing parallels between Hamlet and the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic and conflict and history. And this book was published a few years ago, but I think, especially as we try to interpret and make sense of the extreme brutality going on in Gaza right now, I think it's a really important book, and it's also extremely immersive. Bella happened to be a classmate of mine at New York University, and one thing I really always appreciated about her writing was that it was almost outside of time. It was like it had this kind of older quality to its attention, a very pure form of attention, which you encounter in 19th and 20th century novels, but not so much in contemporary fiction. And she's really ferociously intelligent, but it doesn't always follow that if you're a brilliant thinker, you'll be a brilliant novelist, and she is both. So this is a book that really, it grips you and it won't let go, and it's about Sonia's political awakening, but it's about a lot of other things too. It's beautiful.
And there's also the local director, Mariam, and
right.
she gets to know him.
Right. Have you read it?
No, but I studied the book in order to have this conversation.
Yeah. Right. I think one thing I also really appreciated about this book is that it's not really pandering to an ignorant audience. Like, it's not trying to unpack and explain every single aspect of Palestinian-Israeli relationships and dynamics and histories. There are words in Arabic, there are references, and I think what I felt was that it was written not for a Western reader, but for someone who is already acquainted with this world. And I found that was actually more inviting and more compelling, more interesting. It kind of pushed me to do a lot of research on my own about things that I hadn't learned about before. And I think it's also it's just a really smart move to stage this kind of political awakening in the context of art making. And it's a book that I really couldn't put down. I'd highly recommend it.
Enter Ghost by Isabella Hammad. A woman reeling from a disastrous love affair finds love and hope in Shakespeare and Palestine.
Yeah. It's a book that is also really, it's paced in a way that most contemporary fiction is not. So it transports you the way that I think Tolstoy kind of transports me, or George Eliot transports me. Yeah, there's some treatment of time that's really refreshing.
Great compliment. So Isabella Hammad, I was going to ask you what you already said, because she completed a creative writing at MFA at NYU, and I said, did you know each other? Okay, it was at the same time.
Yeah.
She was a National Book Foundation at 5 under 35 honoree. She's included by The Guardian on their list of the year's writers of exceptional first novels.
She's brilliant.
Wow. And also lots of other awards. Isabella Hammad, Enter Ghost. Another book you chose, this one is translated into Portuguese, Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, Temporada de furacões. It's the name in Portuguese.
Is that a direct translation?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It's literal. It is a brutal, affecting novel of a society in crisis. You tell me about it.
Well, it takes place in a fictional, rural, impoverished town in Mexico called La Matosa. And it's sort of folkloric. It's very rooted in a kind of gritty realism, but it begins, I think, with the sentence, "The witch is dead." And it's centered on the murder of this woman in this village who, she's known as the witch, and she provides mostly reproductive healthcare, as people who are referred to as witches throughout history often did. She provides abortions, but she also provides fertility consultations and things like that. And she's a recluse. She never really leaves her house. And one day she shows up clearly having been murdered in a body of water. And so the book follows several characters and several days and sort of time periods. It's non-linear events that led to this murder. And it is one of the most brutal, violent books I've ever read, but it's also one of the most beautiful, compelling, propulsive books I've ever read, because the prose is so poetic and musical. I read the English translation by Sophie Hughes, and I think she just must be an artist in and of herself, because Fernanda Melchor has this extremely musical cadence. She has this extremely intentional use of language, and you're swept into her sentences. They often each chapter is just one or two sentences that lasts for many clauses. And sometimes when you read books like that, especially modernist sort of stream of consciousness writing, it seems like the point of having a very long winding sentence is to sort of prove how smart the writer is, and it can be confusing or disorienting or clunky. In this case, it's not at all. You never are lost. You feel like you're swept into this powerful current of language, and it will not let you go. Someone described it yesterday to me as like having vertigo. It's something you cannot put down. And it's about poverty and violence and sexism, sexual violence. It's a very challenging book in that sense. But what Fernanda Melchor is doing is she's reflecting real violence, and so it's never gratuitous. You think she's really responding to something that is true and is happening, even if she's setting it in this, kind of almost magical place. It is. I think it was a finalist for the Booker at some point, and it is truly one of the best books I've ever read.
Shortlisted for the International Booker Prize 2020. Yeah, it was. And she had also awards with the translations.
Right.
The German translation, International Literature Award. It was, you chose awarded women.
Right. And it's funny because I think a lot of these people, I didn't read until recently, but it's never too late to read a brilliant writer.
Yeah. It's great to talk about them. Spread the word. She says in an interview, this author, Fernanda Melchor, she had the idea for Hurricane Season when she read a report in her local paper about a murder in a nearby town that was said to have been motivated by witchcraft. And she thought her first plan was to do like In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, like this journalistic research. And then she said, no, it will be dangerous. So then she decided it was better for fiction would provide a better way to question the motivations behind a murder.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I think she is a journalist by trade, right? She mostly does journalism.
She is.
Yeah. So she is also someone who's really, she's always really informed in this fiction. You don't feel like the violence in this fiction is invented. You certainly get the sense that it's responding to something real.
Yeah, I understand where she comes from.
Yeah.
She was born in Veracruz, Mexico. She's a writer and journalist who lives and works in Puebla. She graduated with a degree in journalism from the Universidad Veracruzana in her home state. So another book you chose, Winter and Sokcho. Sokcho?
Yeah,
How do you
Sokcho.
say? Sokcho. From Elisa Shua Dusapin.
Yeah. I'm actually currently reading this book. I'm not yet done with it. I just picked it up the other day. So Elisa Shua Dusapin is a French-Korean writer. She wrote this originally in French, but it takes place in South Korea. It takes place in a town called Sokcho, which is on the border. It's near the border of North Korea. And it's a small fishing town. It's a kind of tourist destination. It's known for its beaches and its national parks and its hot springs. But this novel takes place in the off season, and so it follows a narrator who works at an inn, and it's sort of about her relationship and kind of fascination with a guest. He's a middle-aged French graphic novelist, and he's there looking for inspiration, and so she kind of takes him on a tour of the region, and it's also about her relationship with her mother and her relationship with her boyfriend, and it's an extremely mature book. I recently went to an event she did in New York because her newest novel was just published in English. And she's about my age now, but I learned at that event that she wrote this book when she was 17.
Wow.
Which is extraordinary. I mean, it really is one of them. It's a very mature, restrained book, I would say. She said that Duras was a big influence, Lemon was a big influence for her, and it reads like that book. It reads like that book. It's quite condensed, it's quite concentrated, it's not a very long book, and you feel like every single sentence was chosen intentionally, and every detail was selected with care. It's a very meditative book, it's a melancholy book, it's very internal, and it's just so mature. I cannot believe that a 17-year-old wrote it, but I feel like that happens in France sometimes. Some of the best writers have started publishing when they were really, really young. But yeah, she's just brilliant. I'm reading the French version, which was the original, alongside the English translation, and I think the translator's Anissa Abbas-Higgins. So it's taking me a while to get through it because I'm trying to read them simultaneously, but it's a brilliant book, yeah.
And it won numerous awards, including the National Book Award for Translated Literature. There we go.
Yeah.
The Prix Robert Walser, Prix Alpha, and the Prix Régine de Forges. So super awarded.
Yeah.
It's about the differences, the girl, the narrator, and the client, the guy, the comic artist. They see Korea in different ways, right? She wants to show him what she sees, and he sees in another way. So.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that Elisa mentioned was that I think her mother is South Korean and her father is French. Might be the opposite, but one of her parents is from South Korea.
His French father, South Korean mother.
Okay, yeah. So she said that she was the first grandchild to speak both French and Korean fluently, and so she was often in the position as a child to interpret between the families, and I think she said there was tension between her Korean family and her French family, and so she was always put in the middle of it. And I think one of the results, maybe, of that kind of experience is that she has an incredibly agile, she has an extreme form of kind of cultural and psychological and linguistic agility, which probably owes some of itself to just her disposition and her interest, but certainly it would probably help you develop that agility if you were constantly forced to interpret between two cultures, two languages, two families.
The other's point of view. That's
right.
great to have an argument with her. She will understand you better. She will be more reasonable to... Yeah. It's emotional intelligence, actually.
Exactly, right. And that's, I think that's really clear in this novel, and probably why a 17-year-old was capable of writing such a mature novel.
Yeah. You remind me, it has nothing to do, it's a completely different style. But I interviewed here Bret Easton Ellis. And he also wrote his first novel at 17.
When he was really young, yes, that's right.
American Psycho and all that. So, Elisa Shua Dusapin, Winter in Sokcho. This one is like what, short stories? It's concerning the future of souls, 99 stories of Azrael by Joy Williams. Azrael is the angel of death.
Yes.
So is it short stories?
It's very, very short stories. So each story is about a page long.
Okay.
And she's written another book that's structured similarly called 99 Stories of God. But this book is actually not even published in English yet. I adore her work. I think she's one of the most incredible American writers living today, and I would recommend her work to absolutely everyone. But yeah, this one's not published yet, so I kind of pulled some strings to get an early copy. But I think I've read everything she's written and everything she's published, and
she's an essayist, a short writer.
She writes short stories and novels, and then she writes these very, very short stories. And one thing I love about her work is that she's engaged in many questions. I mean, she's a very secular writer, but I believe her father was a minister, or she had some kind of Christian minister in her family, or some kind of she had that kind of exposure to that religious world and that kind of religious interpretation when she was young. And she's not at all a religious writer now. I don't think she identifies as religious, but she's interested in questions that are normally relegated to the realm of religion and spirituality, and she pulls them into a kind of secular space. For instance, I mean, one of her central fixations that's present across her work is this transition between life and death. She's always writing in and around that topic, and there's very often a sort of supernatural element to her work. And in one of the novels, which won the Pulitzer, it's called "The Quick and the Dead." It's a line from Ulysses. And this was the novel that really began my own novel, The Rabbit Hutch. When I read that book, it was the first Joy Williams book I read, and it just lit my brain on fire, and it made me so interested in the structure, the tone. She also this novel is also many voices, many different characters, and it's very funny. She's one of the funniest writers I know. She's one of the only people who makes me laugh out loud, when I'm really trying not to. I mean, I remember being on the subway in New York once, and I was reading her short stories at this collection called The Visiting Privilege, and something made me laugh so hard that people were looking at me in alarm. That is hard to attract alarm on the subway. There's a lot going on.
Didn't they ask you, what are you reading? I'll have what she's having.
Yeah, I wish I should have just thrown it at everyone. Yeah, read it now. I'll read it out loud. Yeah, she's so funny, and I think part of her humor is that she's really looking the dark matter of life in the eye all the time, and so that can produce very somber and devastating moments. But most often, it produces these sort of absurd, comical moments. And she's also really attentive to environmental degradation and catastrophe, so that's always present in her work. And yeah, so 99 Stories of Azrael, it's they vary. It's obviously an obsession with it's kind of orbiting the obsession of the transition between life and death, as I mentioned. And some of them are conversations that she stages between Azrael and the devil, or Azrael and God, and yet they're very. She's always balancing the kind of sacred and the profane. I think her work is very irreverent and funny. And so, for example, there's a line in there that something about how the devil has an obsession with white sneakers, and he has just infinite pairs of white tennis shoes. And so some of the stories are kind of explicitly staging dialogues between Azrael and God or the devil, and they're always very funny and kind of offbeat, and they go in directions that you wouldn't ever expect. But a lot of the stories are also just kind of short, very condensed stories about characters who have some kind of experience with death. And she balances this composition really beautifully. And she also is she's very much a fiction writer. I would say that her prose, I don't know how to categorize other than it is fiction, but she has the attention of poetry. I mean, she can create really mysterious, expansive moments within a matter of lines. And I would recommend truly all of her work. If you're more of a novel lover, I would start with The Quick and the Dead. If you're more of a short story lover, I would start with The Visiting Privilege. She has another novel called The Changeling, which...
The Changeling?
The Changeling.
Okay.
it was, at the time it was originally published, it was apparently torn apart by critics. I don't know if it was just one critic that kind of tore it apart and then killed it but then it was sort of rediscovered decades later and reissued by Tin House, which is a small publisher in the US. And they released it in this gorgeous cloth-bound cover, and they included a really beautiful foreword by an American writer named Karen Russell. And it's such a good book. It's a real. I'm just so grateful that it was republished and recirculated. But she still has she has a cult following. She's often referred to as a writer's writer within America. I've never really met a writer who doesn't know of her, but she's not that widely read in America, and it's kind of a mystery to me. She's so good, and I don't think she's widely read outside of America. I mean, I haven't actually been to a country where she's published yet. So, yeah, I really think she's one of the best writers on earth, and I would recommend all of her work.
Okay, so who are listening to us speak English, so you can buy them in English. There's no translation in Portugal neither. Yeah. Joy Williams, Concerning the Future of Souls, 99 Stories of Azrael, soon to be published then, because you read before. The Visiting Privilege, The Quick and the Dead. I'll write everything down on the episode description. So between Enter Ghost, Isabella Hammad, Hurricane Season, Fernanda Melchor, Temporada de Furacões, it's translated, Winter in Sokcho, Elisa Shua Dusapin, Concerning the Future of Souls. Choose one.
Oh, I cannot. It was hard enough to choose 4.
I know.
Oh my God, no.
Imagine
I really
my question would be that. Like, just choose one and we'll talk about that one.
I truly cannot choose. I mean, I guess I'll choose Enter Ghost because I do think it's so politically relevant right now.
Okay.
Yeah, we can talk about Enter Ghost.
Enter Ghost, Isabella Hammad. Very nice. Another difficult question for you. As of today, if there would be a book about your life, what would the title be?
Oh my. I mean, unfortunately, my life is just not interesting enough to be a book. I think fiction writers tend to kind of fall, I mean, it's silly to divide anything into 2 categories. There's always more than 2, but I find that most fiction writers I know are either drawn to fiction because they are extremely risk averse and kind of timid and have always lived inside of their minds and, maybe are prone to anxiety and so have always retreated to their imaginations in order to cope with the overwhelming reality around them. And then there's this other kind of fiction writer who is extremely adventurous and wants to write fiction because they want to metabolize experiences that they've had in real life, and they go they seek extreme experiences in order to write about them, and these things are locked into this very mutually nourishing relationship. And I am certainly
You're the
former.
first.
Yeah. Very risk averse, very much.
It's also Blondine. I told you before this conversation.
True.
Yeah,
I guess. I mean, but Blondine, I feel, is much more courageous than I am. I would never stage the kinds of she stages this protest, and I wouldn't do that. But I wouldn't have the guts. But she's I think she is someone who retreats to her mind a lot. But so I would hope that no one would ever read this book. But maybe the title would be something like. A work in progress.
All right, a work in progress. That's great. And your work is in progress also. So this is your first book, and you have others in your drawer and in your computer, and we'll hear about them soon. You have an upcoming novel. I read.
When I got this book deal, it was a 2-book deal. So that was I already had about 100 pages of the book written a couple years ago when I submitted this to publishers. And it's been really hard for me to work on it because the publicity for this book, I mean, I've just been really fortunate that I've been invited to do a lot of it, but that means that I'm often on the road and, away from home and out of my routine. So it's been hard to find the time and mental space, but recently I finally had a bit of it. I finally had a bit of time, and I started to do a writing exchange with my friend, the writer Tommy Orange. And that's been extremely helpful because I really, really respect him. And, it's always useful to exchange writing with someone that you kind of are very intimidated by. Like, if it scares the hell out of you, it can be very generative. I love his writing. So that was really motivating. The first time I had to send him something, I was staying up till 5 a.m, revising. And so hopefully that will continue to, to blossom, but we'll see.
I'll be with my eyes open and waiting for news from you. So in the end of this conversation, I always recommend readings to you. Mm-hmm. And you reminded me while you spoke of Flannery O'Connor. I guess you know her. Mm-hmm. I recommend Flannery O'Connor. And there's this author, I don't know if you know her. She's a French writer and a novelist and a filmmaker. She's known for her work exploring gender, sexuality in people who live in poverty or other marginalized conditions. Mm. So instead of, like you did with Joy Williams, I recommend you all of her books. She's Virginie Despentes. Do you know her?
Just my publisher just insisted that I read her. I haven't read her work yet, but yesterday it was my publicist here. She was saying you have to read her work.
Wow, what a coincidence! Yeah, I thought of you. I usually love to give you a book. I don't have it in English, so I didn't bring one for you.
It,
yeah, you have to find it. Virginie Despentes. She wrote, among others, the King Kong Theory. It's a nonfiction about her life. Mm-hmm. It's sometimes taught in gender studies classes, mm-hmm. and often passed down to millennial women as a recommendation from a cool, not that much older mentor. She's like, she was a prostitute. She writes about it also in this book, particularly King Kong Theory. And she said, like, I wanted to live as a man. Mm-hmm. Why can't I live? She's more than feminist. She's like, I wanted to recommend it to all of my friends, but unfortunately, they're not all ready for it, you know? Yeah. So I think you are. Yeah. I think you have that,
I'm eager to read it,
And then she has, and I remember, because a lot of the books you chose today, most of them have awards for the translated editions. Mm-hmm. And this is a coincidence, but she has a trilogy. And the English translation for her novel, Vernon sous Boutex, was shortlisted for the Man Booker International Prize.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's totally your thing. Yeah. And I had these critiques I read about her. She's controversial, of course. Mm-hmm. And she said, she wickedly refutes the stereotype of the chic French girl and exposes the sham at the heart of femininity. Mm-hmm. And it shows our complicity, male and female, individual and corporate, in keeping the sham of femininity alive.
Mm. That reminds me of something someone said to me recently about how all performances of femininity, no matter the gender of the performer, are a kind of drag. It's always a sort of theater because it developed alongside sexism.
Yeah, and she's, I think still nowadays people don't exactly know what feminism is. You still have problems with interpretation, or I have an older friend the other day told me she's over 50, and she said, and she has a daughter that teaches her what feminism is, and she tries to understand her daughter and think like her and be contemporary. And she said, you know what, for me, feminism at my time was a girl that wanted to grow her hair beneath her arms.
I think my mom had a similar experience with that movement.
That's why we still have a lot of work to do.
Right.
And thank you for your work, and thank you for coming here, Tess Gunty.
Well, thank you. I love talking about books I love, so this was such a pleasure, and I'll definitely check out
Virginie Despentes.
Virginie Despentes.
I brought a Portuguese book. I'll show you.
Oh, great.
But for you to write it down.
I'll find it. Thank you so much.